Welcome to Salam Radio 106.2 FM. You're listening to Lisa Marie from Raham Project. I'm standing in today for your regular host, Faiza. We are your local midwives sharing midwifery insights with you. So today we are talking about blood pressure in pregnancy, so raised blood pressure in pregnancy and preeclampsia. If you would like to get in touch with us on the show, please call or text 01733 602 133 or email us on info@salamradio.co.uk, or you can comment on the Facebook thread at Salam Radio, which is also shared on our page at Raham Project. Today we are welcoming Professor Andrew Shannon, OBE. And Professor Andrew Shannon is a Professor of Obstetrics at King's College London. He's based at St Thomas's Hospital and specialises in clinical trials in pregnancy and birth. He is a leading premature birth expert, and his research interests include interventions to predict and prevent preterm birth, preeclampsia, encourage normal birth, and the use of blood pressure monitoring. So his charity work includes Tommy's, the baby charity, Action Medical Research. He is a director of the international charity Maternity Worldwide. And the reason we've invited Professor Shannon here today is because of his role as medical advisor to the charity Action on Preeclampsia. And we will be discussing raised blood pressure in pregnancy and preeclampsia with him. So welcome, Professor Shannon. You are live on air now. What an incredible set of skills and knowledge you have. And alongside that, I understand that you are also a dedicated park runner.
Yes, I am, Miss Marie. I was out on Saturday trying to stay fit. It's an increasing struggle as you get older, but it does mean I can eat more, which is always nice.
Oh, fantastic. And you are clearly into your own fitness as well, and absolutely passionate about preeclampsia and raised blood pressure conditions in pregnancy. And I wondered if you could just tell us a little bit about these conditions.
Yeah, sure. Preeclampsia is one of those conditions that surprisingly, few people have even heard of it when they get pregnant, but it's something that's been around forever. It hasn't gone away. It's perhaps even slightly more prevalent than it used to be as certain conditions change. Women get a little bit older, and it's associated with other things like being overweight. So it's probably as big a problem today as it's ever been. Mm-hmm. About 1 in 20 women, so that's 5% of the population, will get preeclampsia. More women will get raised blood pressure, and there is a difference between preeclampsia and blood pressure. So we rely on the blood pressure as a way of protecting preeclampsia, but you need to have an additional feature for it to be preeclampsia. Whereas if you just have isolated raised blood pressure, it either means it hasn't yet kind of progressed, but the important thing is you're not so at risk if it's just the high blood pressure. And the other slightly confusing thing is if you have underlying high blood pressure before you're pregnant, that itself means the chance of you getting preeclampsia is higher. So it's 3 or 4 times higher than if you didn't have underlying raised blood pressure. So it's a condition that affects an awful lot of women. Fortunately, if it's well managed and you detect it, it's relatively easy to keep safe. So you watch mother very closely. You keep an eye on the baby and the baby's well-being. And when things do go wrong, as long as you deliver the baby in a timely manner, the baby's often okay if it's not too premature, and the mother will recover and be fine. And when it's well managed, it's like virtually unheard of for a mother to die. And fortunately, most babies do well, particularly if you get it later on. However, there's no doubt that it is a killer. Mothers do die all over the world from this condition, as do babies. And it's one of those things where there is huge inequalities across different countries, depending on the type of care. So even between the United States and the UK, there's a big difference in the chance of a mother dying, not because they don't have good care in the United States, but because they don't let everyone access it equally. And I think that's the key thing, for everyone to access universal healthcare provision.
That's really interesting to hear the differences in different countries, and something we talk a lot about with our mothers here in the UK is that generally it is safe to give birth in the UK and in comparison to other countries. And this is something that I'm really interested in with raised blood pressure and preeclampsia in particular, because we understand that black women, for example, are disproportionately affected by preeclampsia. I wonder if you could share any insights about the inequalities in the UK with regards to preeclampsia.
Yes, so, yes, I mean, there are certain groups of women who are more likely to get the condition and therefore be at increased risk. There are underlying things. For example, if you have certain diseases already, such as diabetes or high blood pressure, as we said earlier, and even some other sort of autoimmune conditions, they're all risk factors for getting it. So those are things which are more prevalent in different ethnic groups. So black women, for example, are more likely to have underlying high blood pressure. So that's one reason why it might be higher. They just have different risk factors. I think if you have a baby when you're older, if you have twins, for example, and we know that the twinning rate in a black population is nearly twice that, say, a Caucasian population, so about a 1 in 40 chance of twins instead of a 1 in 80. So those are all kind of slightly unusual reasons why you might have more preeclampsia because of other associated factors. And I think being overweight certainly doesn't help. And if it runs in the family, there is a small component of genetics which makes it more likely. And I think the other key thing is if you don't access care or you're not treated as well, and this is a big problem around the world, then the disease itself goes undetected. It therefore presents late when it's serious. And that's another reason why it might appear to be higher in a subgroup. It's not just about underlying risk factors. It's also about either seeking care correctly or then not receiving it adequately at the time you do seek it. And the huge discrepancies across the world. We may talk about a 4-fold risk of a black woman dying in the UK, but actually, if you go to, say, West Africa, that's more like 100 times greater. So we are talking about big differences.
That is interesting. So very, very different in the UK, and accessing that care is incredibly important. And we do understand that a lot of women access care early and in a timely fashion with their midwives here in the UK. I hear you say risk factors quite a lot, and I'm worried that might scare some mothers. And I just wonder if there's anything that people who feel that they have some of these indications that they could develop preeclampsia, such as being overweight, if there's anything that they can do before they become pregnant or in pregnancy to help reduce the chances of them developing preeclampsia.
There are definitely some very positive things you can do. I mean, the other thing, just to reassure women, Marie, is that even if you have every risk factor in the book, quite a lot of those women will not get preeclampsia. And conversely, you can be perfectly healthy and have no additional worries about your health, and you can still also get preeclampsia. So it's something you need to look out for, whatever.
We can never predict, can we? We can never truly predict.
Exactly. Now, obviously, there are public health messages here. So if you have your baby later, it is more likely to result in preeclampsia. And human nature being what it is quite difficult to get people to change their behaviors, because obviously there are huge social and other pressures that sort of come to play when you're deciding when to have your family. And something which is relatively unlikely to happen tends not to influence that. But I think it's important we have those public health messages. So being a good weight when you have your baby. So we know that a normal body mass index, between 20 and 25 has the optimal risk. reducing the chance of getting conditions such as preeclampsia. And if you are, very equally, if you're very young, as well as older, that also increases your risk of preeclampsia. So we have to kind of get these messages over. Now, you say, well, what can you do about it? You can actually make life choices about when you have your children. It's good to have your children in a more optimal weight. And the great thing about pregnancy is it's a short, sharp time in your life where you might have a goal. I'm going to have a baby next year. Losing weight is very difficult and challenging, but if you have that short-term goal, it may be more doable. And there's a lot of benefits in being an optimal weight, not just for preeclampsia, but for lots of other things. And the baby's risk of stillbirth, the baby's risk of other things are better. Your risk of getting diabetes in pregnancy, which sometimes pregnancy brings it on, is also reduced, as well as this risk of preeclampsia. So that's a very practical thing. Optimal weight. If you can, maybe an optimal age. I think the key thing is if you think you may get it, and this actually goes for everybody because, as I said, anybody can get it, is you get those right checks while you're pregnant. Get your blood pressure checked, get your urine checked. Don't miss these visits because you can feel perfectly normal and still have bad preeclampsia. If you do have an underlying factor that makes you more likely to get it, we do recommend giving low-dose aspirin. You might say, well, taking a drug in pregnancy is quite a strange thing, but we know that at a very low dose, aspirin is incredibly safe, and it does reduce the risk.
And how does aspirin work? Because a lot of mothers ask me as a community midwife, well, aspirin is a painkiller. How does that prevent preeclampsia?
Well, it's interesting. It is a painkiller because it does knock out a certain enzyme system. And that enzyme system has a number of actions, including controlling your blood vessels, as well as controlling pain. Now, if you knock it out a lot with a full 300 milligram headache tablet, it will stop pain, but that actually is not a good thing for a pregnancy. However, if you knock it out a little bit with a very low dose, and that means 75 or 150 milligrams, so that would be half a headache tablet, then what happens is the sort of good enzymes are maintained, what we call prostacyclins, and the bad ones are knocked for 6, what we call thromboxane. And that favorable balance does translate into less chance of getting early onset preeclampsia. So, there is a very understood mechanism. It's a middle-aged man thing to stop to take this low-dose aspirin to protect your heart, but it's known to protect pregnancies as well. So if you have a risk factor, and what I mean by risk factor, for example, if you have twins, even if it's your first pregnancy, that is a slight increased chance. And so if you have 2 of these mild factors, like being twins, first pregnancy, over the age of 40, or a very high body mass index over 35, something like those. If you have 2 of those, we would recommend low-dose aspirin. And if you have one major risk factor, for example, if you have underlying problems like high blood pressure, then you might be recommended you take it as well.
Okay, well, thank you very much for sharing that information, because it is something that women certainly come to their community midwife, they find out they have a risk of developing preeclampsia, and it can be quite a worrying time for them. Obviously, as community midwives, we see women very regularly and we check their blood pressure, we ask them to do a urine sample for us, and we check for protein, because I understand that preeclampsia, it starts to impact, if it develops, it starts to impact the kidney, and then it can impact the rest of the body as well, and it can start to affect the liver, and it can kind of contribute to this. It's almost like a shutdown of the body. Is it something that women should be afraid of if they were to be developing preeclampsia for themselves or for their baby?
No, I think as I said at the beginning, Lisa Marie, it's really a safe condition as long as you're under the correct care. So if your midwife is seeing you, you get the right checks, you get admitted and potentially delivered in a timely manner, it is incredibly safe. So I certainly don't think you should be frightened of it. That said, if you don't have good care, then it is a killer. And it's one of those huge successes that deaths from preeclampsia have all but disappeared in the mother now because of good care. We haven't cured the disease. We've simply managed it better. So I really wouldn't suggest people were frightened of it. You described the fact that it affects the whole body, and that's, if you don't have raised blood pressure, you can still have preeclampsia, which is why we teach people about the symptoms to look out for. So there are things like headache, pain over the liver, which feels a bit like indigestion, or funny vision. Those can all be features of the things you were describing, because it affects all the blood vessels in the body. And blood pressure is not the most important thing. It's just an easy thing to measure, as is the protein. It's an easy thing to measure. But it can affect your liver. So there are people who might present with what's very bad indigestion, but everything else is normal, and that might be the first sign of it. So if you do have one of these symptoms, headaches, blurred vision, indigestion type pain that isn't going away with standard treatments, you should get your blood pressure and urine checked, and if it's normal, get it rechecked.
Fantastic, and that is really the key message, is to access care and seek that support if you develop any symptoms. Of course, midwives will be monitoring regularly through the usual checks, but symptoms can occur when you're in between your midwifery checks. So contacting the local maternity helpline here in Peterborough, we have a helpline that women can contact. It's 24 hours a day. They can speak to a midwife if they have any worries or concerns. And that system operates across the country in all NHS trusts as far as I'm aware. And what sort of care would women expect if they went into hospital worried that they had preeclampsia because they were developing a headache, and they were to see a midwife or a doctor? What would be the typical care that they would expect?
Well, I mean, the first thing one has to do is see whether they genuinely have the disease. And that is not that easy because, as you can imagine, headaches and indigestion and those types of symptoms are commonplace in pregnancy anyway. And equally, your blood pressure may just go up a bit by chance. So the first thing that will happen is a period of assessment. Now, what's been very exciting in the last few years is a new blood test has become available, and more than 80% of units in England currently have that test. They're called placental-like growth factor tests, so PLGF like tests. Sometimes it's a ratio, sometimes it's PLGF. But those tests are very reliable. It's a simple blood test, and it tells you for sure whether you have preeclampsia or not. If you're very likely to get it soon, or if you have it because of one of these blood tests, then you will be monitored closely, often in hospital, but not always. And then the idea is to keep an eye on all the things you mentioned, so your liver function, your kidney function, and particularly the well-being of the baby. And if any of those are in jeopardy and really quite scary, because the condition doesn't get better until you deliver, then you may be advised to be delivered earlier, because that will cure the mother. And we can also give things to the baby if the baby has to be born early to make sure the baby has a safer start in life, things like antenatal steroids or magnesium to protect the brain. So there's a lot of very positive things one can do to help the mother and the baby if you do have the condition. But a lot of the initial management is just confirming whether you genuinely have it or not.
So it's almost like a watch and wait game. Would that be fair to say?
Yeah, because we don't have treatments to get rid of the disease, it is largely a sort of empirical management. So we have to, first of all, confirm the diagnosis, which, as I said, is not always that easy. Once you've got the diagnosis, it really is only a matter of time before you have to be delivered. And it's very rare to go more than a couple of weeks after a diagnosis, and often less than that if you diagnose it early. So it's a bit of a sort of tightrope in that your clinicians will be watching you closely, and they'll make a call when things are getting critically worse to say, now it's time to deliver, because that will cure the mother for sure. And the idea is to keep the mother as pregnant as long as possible while the baby's getting benefit. But if the baby's unwell, there's very little reason to continue. And in fact, because the placenta is not working well, staying pregnant is not that beneficial. It's only necessary if it's very premature, and it would be critical to deliver the baby very early.
Because we do know that preeclampsia, and please correct me if I'm wrong, my knowledge is very limited compared to yours, that it's something to do with the placenta and how the placenta implants. Is that right?
So the sort of high-level thoughts about it, Lisa Marie, is that why do some women get it and others don't, and why do some women with risk factors don't get it and vice versa? So it's a bit confusing, but we do think there's a genetic component. So you have to be susceptible to it. You also have to have an insult that causes it. Now, unfortunately, that insult, as we call it, comes from the genetics of your partner, and that is what the placenta is made up of, both of you. And it's the way the mother reacts to the placenta, we think, probably sparks the condition. And how badly she gets it is also dependent a little bit on her genetic makeup. We know, for example, if your sister had it, you've got a much higher risk of getting it yourself. So there are some genetics about it. And some partners who are associated with a preeclamptic pregnancy, if they change partners, their new partner, the new woman, is more likely to get preeclampsia. So there are all sorts of interesting effects like that are sort of genetic related. So in a way, it's like the wrong placenta in the wrong mother means you get it, but it does mean there's a very mixed picture. And just because you have risk factors or just because you're normal doesn't determine whether you will or won't get it.
Wow, so I'm really interested in this genetic link, and it ties in really nicely to our thoughts about birth stories and talking to your family about your birth experiences, your pregnancy experiences. So actually having that real opportunity to sit down and chat to the women in your family about what was their pregnancy like, and understanding if perhaps there's been preeclampsia in the family previously. And then I guess it would be a case of thinking, well, if there has, then would that be enough for somebody to perhaps start the aspirin that you mentioned?
Definitely. So I think if your first degree relative, i.e. your mother or your sister, got preeclampsia, particularly if she got it early, that is quite a strong risk factor. So family history is one of those factors we take into account when we make a decision whether you should be on low-dose aspirin. I think importantly, if you have got a strong family history, or something you can tell your daughter, for example, if you get preeclampsia and then, for her future life, is that you're aware of it, that you seek care, early pregnancy to make a decision whether you need some of those treatments to prevent the problem, like low-dose aspirin. But more importantly, perhaps, make sure you don't miss it when it happens, because you can feel perfectly well and get it, and so people can look after you. And as we've stated many times during this call, it's very safe as long as you know about it and you're under good care.
Thank you. Yes, I think that's definitely the key message, is to access your community midwife, access the right care at the right time, really. We are going to be coming up to a break in a little while, and certainly when we come back from that break, I'd love to talk to you about Action on Preeclampsia, the charity, and what they do to support and provide information for families. And I would also like to discuss with you any long-term effects of having a raised blood pressure or preeclampsia in pregnancy that mothers perhaps need to be aware of. Certainly, as a community midwife, I care for a lot of women who perhaps have come in to see me for their usual checks, have a raised blood pressure, and we then ship them off to the hospital and they have lots of checks and they come back and they're absolutely fine. Is there a need, if you're checked and you're told no, everything is fine, what would your message to women be in terms of continuing to seek care or support if they're concerned or worried?
Well, I mean, it depends on the clinical situation. I think if you've had the odd raised blood pressure and yet your checks suggest that you're okay, it doesn't mean you're not going to continue to be okay. So like all pregnant women, you should continue regular visits with your midwife, regular blood pressure and urine checks, because it may have been the first sign and preeclampsia hasn't yet manifested. So you definitely should continue checks. And you would probably get advice about whether those checks need to be more than your normal antenatal visits or your previous antenatal visits. Now, I mentioned the new blood test, the placental growth factor, the PLGF-like test. They are incredibly useful because if there's any doubt whether you're going to get it in the future, that blood test reliably tells you whether you're actually very, very unlikely to get it and you can go back to normal antenatal care, or yes, it's coming and you need more frequent checks. So I would encourage, all the women listening in just to ask them about these PLGF tests and actually seek advice if your local hospital doesn't have one, because there probably is another one that does. Okay. We are pushing very hard as a charity to make sure all units get it. It's recommended by NICE. It's recommended by NHS England, and it's something everyone should have.
Amazing, thank you. We're just going to adverts.
You're listening to Salam Radio, and it's now time for Zohar Azan. This Azan is sponsored by UK Islamic Mission, serving humanity since 1962.
Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allah. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله
الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما صليت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم وبارك على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما باركت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم في العالمين إنك حميد مجيد. اللهم رب هذه الدعوة التامة والصلاة القائمة آت محمدا الوسيلة والفضيلة وابعثه مقاما محمودا الذي وعدته. اللهم آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار. اللهم بك نحيا وبك نموت وإليك المصير. رضينا بالله ربا وبالإسلام دينا وبمحمد صلى الله عليه وسلم نبيا ورسولا.
اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد النبي الأمي وعلى آله
Peterborough's community radio station, Salam Radio, 106.2 FM.
Welcome back to Salam Radio 106.2 FM. You're listening to Lisa Marie from Raham Project, standing in for your regular host Faiza. We are your local midwives sharing midwifery insights with you. Today we are talking with Professor Andrew Shannon, OBE, which I forgot to mention earlier, about raised blood pressure in pregnancy and preeclampsia. Please do get in touch with us, share your experiences about blood pressure, raised blood pressure and preeclampsia, anything you might have experienced in your pregnancy. You can call us or text us on 01733 602 133, or you can email us on info@salamradio.co.uk or comment on the Facebook thread at Salam Radio. So I'm going to bring Professor Andrew Shannon, OBE, back into the conversation. We've had such a fantastic first half of the show, understanding more about preeclampsia and what to look out for. And something that you were talking a lot about, Professor Shannon, was giving birth in a timely manner. And I just wondered if we could explore that a little bit more. What might that look like for mothers who are in hospital? They have been diagnosed with preeclampsia and they are now on this watch and wait. Is it the right time to give birth? Because, of course, we do understand that preeclampsia is a condition of the sort of the second half of pregnancy. So could you share your insight into that, please?
Yes, of course, Lisa Marie. I mean, unfortunately, the only way to get rid of preeclampsia is to deliver the baby. You know, we've spoken about treatments to prevent it coming, but once it's happened, it's not going to go away until you've delivered. We do give some drugs, but they're not there to cure the disease or to even prevent the disease. What it does is some treatments are necessary just to keep the mother safe while you're waiting for that time to be delivered, which is the cure. So, for example, you might treat the blood pressure to prevent the mother getting strokes, or you might even give some drugs like magnesium to stop fits happening. But at the end of the day, the preeclampsia is still there, and the risks to the baby and to the mother exist until the mother's delivered. So the only cure is delivery. Now, we don't want to deliver babies very early because very early babies don't do well. I mean, if they're early enough, they might not survive. And then in the very early babies, for example, particularly before 28 weeks, there may be serious problems. It's associated with lung difficulties. It's associated with brain difficulties. So everything from cerebral palsy through to chronic lung disease are more common, and including the intellect of the child will be not as good if you're born early. So for lots of reasons, we don't want to deliver a baby early. However, the mother will not get better until she's delivered. Also, sometimes the baby's very sick, and if you don't deliver it, it may die. So there's a bit of a balancing act here, a bit of a tightrope about, you know, keeping the baby in long enough to benefit, but acting soon enough so that the baby doesn't get worse. Now, until recently, if you have preeclampsia from 37 weeks, we would routinely say, look, you're better off being delivered. There's no question staying pregnant is a bad idea. More recently, we've realized that being delivered even from 34 weeks routinely is not a bad thing because the placenta is not well. And if you wait, all you do is increase the risk to the baby. So before 34 weeks, we would generally strive to keep a mother pregnant unless there's something critical happening to her or the baby. After 34 weeks, we get more relaxed, saying, well, just with a diagnosis of preeclampsia, it's probably worthwhile being delivered. And if you are delivered early, particularly before 34 weeks, there are lots of really good things you can do for the baby. So we can give drugs like magnesium to protect the brain, the baby's brain. This is not fits in the mother, and we can give steroids to improve the lung function of the baby in a timely way. Again, a day or two before the mother delivers, and she can be delivered in a unit that can look after very little babies. And if you combine all these good things, actually, vast majority of babies are fine. We recently did a study in this country where we delivered in a study, 900 women routinely from 34 to 37 weeks. So that's preterm. Normally, you'd be pretty worried about that in a sick mother with preeclampsia. But the great thing about that study, not a single baby died. So that means good care saves babies. And I think that's really good to know.
It is really good to know, and it's very reassuring for mothers to hear that managing the balance between the mother's health and the baby's health is so important, and it's really important to the staff that care for the families as well. And I can't help but think about mothers who might be in this position and think about how the impact upon them. So they discover that they have preeclampsia, and then potentially their baby will be born early. It sounds like it's very likely that their baby would be born early, and that presumably would involve an induction of labour or a caesarean section.
Yes, I mean, I guess the first thing to say is if the diagnosis has been made and it's correct, say for example one of these PLGF tests, you can almost put a stopwatch on it. It's not going to get better, and it's only if it happens early on, it's usually only a few days before there is a crisis to either the mother or the baby that requires urgent delivery. So I think just knowing that, you can prepare a mother and say, look, we know you're going to have to be delivered early. You need to stay in hospital. We need to act quickly if things get worse, and we can do lots of positive things to protect you and the baby in the interim. So once you've made the decision, yes, this is now bad, we need to deliver because the risk benefit of continuing favors delivery, then you have to instigate delivery. Now, how you deliver depends a little bit on the circumstance. If the baby is struggling, then it may be that a labour would not be a good idea. And, for example, if the baby's very tired, and we can tell this from the scans, your doctors may advise going straight for a caesarean. However, many women can achieve a normal, we call them not particularly normal, but a vaginal delivery now, because I think all deliveries are normal. But therefore, there's the option of having a vaginal birth. And actually, the paradox is that sometimes by acting a little bit earlier, while the baby's still well, we know you're more likely to achieve a vaginal birth. And I think you might say, well, why go through all that hassle of a vaginal birth? I'm worried about my baby. Caesarean sections are particularly dangerous in women who have preeclampsia, because preeclampsia does affect your bleeding. It does affect other features that only surgery will make worse. So it is a goal. It's obviously not a nice situation to be in. Don't worry if you need one. They're still incredibly safe. But if given a choice, vaginal delivery has got some merits in terms of safety for both mother and baby.
I think that's key, isn't it? It's about being involved in your care, talking to your doctors, to the midwives that are looking after you, and making choices that are right for you in that moment. And that will look different for everybody.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Lisa Marie. In recent years, we are very amenable to mothers' wishes when it comes to the mode of delivery. And many women now will choose to have a caesarean anyway. But I think you need to be well informed and understand the risks and the benefits if you choose a caesarean. And if a vaginal birth is an option, it's something to strongly consider if you have preeclampsia, even if it's premature. And I wouldn't want people to think they're definitely going to need a caesarean, or that a caesarean is necessarily the best option.
So it really sounds like that women are likely to have a bit of time to make a decision, and this is where Action on Preeclampsia comes in nicely. So I would love it if you could share a little bit about the charity and what they do and how they can maybe help mums.
Yeah, so Action on Preeclampsia has been around for about 30 years now. I've been chairman of the charity now for the last 5 or 6 years. We have a great board of trustees and a chief exec and a team who kind of manage it. And our principal aim is really to raise public and professional awareness of preeclampsia, and we want to improve care And we want to actually just ease or prevent both the physical and emotional suffering that's caused by the disease. If you go on the website, it is quite simply actiononpreeclampsia.org.uk. It has various domains. We offer support and guidance and information to families, so you can click on there and get good advice about what preeclampsia is and share stories from other women who've been in similar situations. And I think a lot of women will find that very comforting and supportive to know they're not alone and that this is commonplace and people do well. We also have a role in providing education for healthcare professionals, particularly our frontline healthcare professionals like the midwives, who are very critical in identifying and triaging in this condition. And we generally provide a sort of service where we want to promote good clinical research, and we will often get involved. For example, the House of Lords recently did a big inquiry into preterm birth, and we represented the sort of interests of people being delivered early because of preeclampsia in that forum. It's a charity, but it's very much focused on women. And I think if you have preeclampsia, I think you would find it only a good thing to go through it, look at the information, and just share the stress of what can be shocking news, and realize that you're not alone and you're very likely to be okay.
That's really key, and there's something so important about having a support network, whether that's other people that have been through preeclampsia, whether it's people that understand and know what it's about, whether that's your family that's around you and your friends that can rally in and help out after the baby's born. Because presumably once a baby has been born, after somebody's been diagnosed with preeclampsia, they're likely to be spending time in hospital, whether that's their local hospital or possibly even somewhere a bit further afield if they've had to transfer to a different place that has better care for babies.
Yes. I mean, I think you're right about the support network. It's a shocker when people hear about this. They hear of a disease, they say, something's happened to me, it's jeopardizing my baby's health. What is this? What have I done wrong? All those things kind of immediately go through women's minds. And I think just getting good information about, what it is, a balanced view of your options, is incredibly helpful. And I think the charity is a great way, or a great starting place at least. If you get a diagnosis, or if you have a friend, just say, well, just go and have a read here. This will help you.
Fantastic. And in terms of, I'm thinking a lot, we've talked about so much, and I've got so many thoughts going through my mind about preeclampsia, and I feel like I need to go and do some of the healthcare professionals' education to kind of update my own knowledge, really. And I'm just thinking about after the baby's born, their postnatal care. What would that look like for a mother and a baby?
Well, I mean, for most women, Lisa Marie, they end up having a fairly straightforward delivery, whether it be by cesarean or hopefully by vaginal delivery, which is a little bit safer. They will therefore go through the normal recovery processes, and the baby might be delivered early, in which case there are implications for a preterm baby. We need to make sure the baby's feeding all right and maintaining its temperatures, and therefore that may mean that you stay in hospital a little bit longer. But for the vast majority of women giving birth with preeclampsia, the babies are big enough, strong enough to be fine, and they just need a little bit more sort of care and attention to get them up to speed. But the good news is that they do bounce back. They become the individuals they were always destined to become, and it's absolutely fine. Obviously, if the baby's very premature, they might have to be away from the mother. They may be in a special care unit or an intensive care unit for babies, a NICU, and that obviously has implications. As far as the mother's concerned, if she's had surgery, obviously there are implications for recovering from that. But she will get rapidly better once she's delivered. For a day or two, she needs to be watched closely because preeclampsia can still have effects for a little while after delivery. For example, the risk of having a fit doesn't go away immediately, and you would be monitored to make sure that those risks are disappearing. For a small group of women, their blood pressure will stay high. They may need treatment, and it's really good idea to be followed up 6 weeks or so to make sure that you are better, because again, for a subgroup, there are implications for future health. We now know that if you get preeclampsia, it probably reveals the fact that you are susceptible to future health issues. It's not like a big thing, but it does mean you are more likely to have high blood pressure when you're older and potentially have the risk of things associated with that, like heart attacks and strokes in 20, 30 years' time. So although it's not like a major factor, it's a bit like being overweight or smoking or having the wrong parents. Not always anything you can do about it, but knowing you have that risk factor means you can look after your other risk factors. You can keep an eye on your blood pressure and, if necessary, take tablets to reduce it or other factors to keep your blood pressure down for your long-term health risks.
So there's a lot you can do to look after yourself, really, isn't there? And all the common things that we talk about, regardless of whether somebody has any kind of medical condition in pregnancy or has had a straightforward pregnancy, labour and birth, is to really take care of your well-being once your baby is born, to remember the fact that you're becoming a mother, you have this complete shift in hormones as well. So it's not just your physical well-being, but your emotional well-being. And for a lot of mothers who experience something like preeclampsia and have perhaps not had the birth that they expect to have had or would have hoped to have had, to actually remember that there is that opportunity to pause, to reflect on that with your maternity healthcare team, and to access therapy and support if that is needed as well. Because although we're super women, we can't always get it all right, and we've got to give it a bit of time to let things settle and develop and build that bond with our babies. I'm really sorry. Carry on.
Just to add, Lisa Marie, it's one goal, really good goal for all pregnant women, not just women who've had preeclampsia, is to get back to their pre-pregnancy weight. Obviously being pregnant is associated with putting on a lot of weight, and a lot of that will be fluid and other things, but you can also put on, adipose and so on, and some women will be heavier people afterwards. Now, we know that subsequent pregnancies have more risks if you have put on weight. By keeping your weight down and working hard to get fit, and that's unbelievably difficult when you're looking after a little one, it does have huge benefits, not only for your own future health, but for your future pregnancies. And the time to do it is sort of in that postnatal period. So we encourage breastfeeding, and we encourage just keeping an eye on your own health. And remember, you now have big responsibilities. You need to look after yourself. Exactly.
Absolutely. And if you've had preeclampsia in one pregnancy, am I right in thinking that there is a higher chance in your next pregnancy that you would develop it again? What's the rates around that?
It is more likely to happen. The good news is that for most women, it doesn't recur. So it depends a little bit when you get it and how bad it was. So if you got it very early on in your pregnancy, for example, before 28 weeks, and if you got it really badly, then the risk of getting it again is higher. But actually, even in that highest risk group, the majority of women, i.e. more than 50% of them, will not get it again, which is good news. And I think if you look after your weight, if you take low-dose aspirin and you take the right advice, you can make a big difference to making sure your next pregnancy is actually healthy. So I wouldn't want women to worry if they've had early onset preeclampsia. It's not their fault. The good news is the vast majority of people will be okay in the next pregnancy. And if you do get it, it's likely to be less severe, particularly if you take those preventative therapies we've discussed.
That's amazing. Thank you. And I can't believe 55 minutes has gone really fast. It's been incredibly interesting listening to your experience. Was there anything that you wanted to share that we've not touched on in terms of your research or your work around preeclampsia and raised blood pressure that you think would be valuable to the families listening today?
I mean, listen, one of the things I do is I work a lot in Africa and around the world, in Asia and South America, where preeclampsia is infinitely worse. And I think the lesson for me is to stress to people that good care does make such a difference, so much so that, we worry that our midwives and our clinicians sort of lose sight of just how important a condition it is. Mm-hmm. But on the other hand, continue to do the excellent work that has got those excellent outcomes. I think in the UK, we have some of the best outcomes in the world, particularly with a mother, and we mustn't lose that because we haven't yet cured the condition. So back to the simple messages, just seek advice, get those blood pressure and urine checks through your pregnancy, and it will make a big difference to your safety.
That's wonderful. Thank you. Thank you so much for coming on the show today, Professor Shannon, for your incredible insight. Parents, families, mothers, daughters, anyone that is listening, please talk to your families about preeclampsia and understand if it is something that has happened within your own family because of that genetic link. If you experienced raised blood pressure in pregnancy, or in fact you're thinking about getting pregnant and you know that your blood pressure is raised, please access Action on Preeclampsia website and their information. The charity has lots of information, leaflets and support as well. And thank you everyone for listening to Midwifery Insights today. And once again, thank you very much, Professor Andrew Shannon, for joining us.
Great pleasure. Thank you. Keep up your good work. Excellent.
Thank you. So we will be back as Raham Project, your local midwife, sharing midwifery insights with you in a couple of weeks on our next show. Please join in. You can always reach out to us at Raham Project if you're in need of any information or support and you are pregnant or you have a new baby. We are right here to support you, so please connect with us, www.rahamproject.org.uk, or you can find us on social media as well, at Raham Project. We have lots of local events going on in the area, lunch clubs where we meet up with other mums and walk and talks, that opportunity to meet with mums, meet with the team of volunteers that are incredibly dedicated to Raham Project, and to meet Faiza as well, who's your local midwife and founder of Raham Project. So please do come and join us. And thanks again. We look forward to sharing midwifery insights with you in a couple of weeks.